Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in November, and I actually had a really good reading month. I didn't have the greatest reading month in October. I was just really busy with other things, and the books that I did get to, I guess, were a bit hit and miss. So when November rolled around, I was determined to devote a bit more time to reading. I ended up reading 6 novels, mostly horror, 1 graphic novel and 1 true crime memoir, and out of those, all but 1 were excellent. I gave them 4 stars, and then 1 I actually gave 5 stars to. So yes, it was a great month. First up, I read The Between by Tananarive Due, and this was her debut novel from 1995. And it's about a guy called Hilton. He's in his 30s, he's married, they have 2 kids. When he was a kid, he almost drowned, but his grandmother saved him. And ever since then, he's had nightmares relating to the incident until he went through therapy a few years ago and the nightmares seem to have stopped. In the present day, Hilton's wife Day Day has recently been elected the first black woman judge in their county, and soon after she starts receiving racist hate mail. Hilton is determined to protect his wife and their 2 children, but these racist messages also trigger his nightmares to return, and he starts to struggle with his day-to-day because of his lack of sleep, and the line between what is real and what isn't real becomes blurred. And I absolutely loved this. It was my first novel by Tananarive Due, definitely won't be my last. I really liked her writing. It hooked me in right from the beginning, and it did a really good job with the past and the present, and learning more about what happened to Hilton and how he's dealt with that throughout his life. There were also some supernatural elements which I really enjoyed. And yeah, I was just really impressed with this novel, and I definitely want to read more by her. Let me know if you have read anything by her, if you recommend something else to check out next. But yeah, this was excellent and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, unfortunately, was my dud of the month, and this was volume 1 of the graphic novel adaptation of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. I just happened to stumble upon this in my library, and I noticed that one of the authors was Denise Mina. She is a crime thriller writer, and I've only read 1 of her books, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought this would just be an interesting graphic novel to pick up and give it a go. I didn't even know that they had made a graphic novel version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but apparently it came out a few years ago. But unfortunately, this just didn't work for me. I have read the original trilogy of books by Stieg Larsson, and I've seen all of the film adaptations, and the books and the films are all excellent. But this graphic novel adaptation, I just felt there was way too much to try and cram in to something so small. And I totally get that it must be really difficult to try and turn something that's such a big novel into a graphic novel, but I don't know, it just didn't work for me. I felt like everything was rushed, things didn't really make sense because it was kind of so edited down, and the artwork I wasn't a huge fan of. Everyone kind of looked the same, and so even though I was familiar with the characters and the storyline, I just found it a bit confusing. So yeah, that was a bit of a shame. I just didn't think it was very good, unfortunately, and I won't bother reading any more of the series. I'm not sure how many volumes are in it, but I'll probably leave it at that. I ended up only giving it 2 stars. But thankfully from here on out, everything else I read was excellent, and the next book was Offseason by Jack Ketchum. This was his first published novel, but this particular edition came out some years later. Apparently the original publication was very much edited and cut down, and some years later he was able to release it in its uncut form, and yeah, I'm glad I read this version. This is about a writer who ends up renting a cabin in the middle of nowhere for a while so she can just kind of be alone, get away from everything and focus on a project that she's working on. and she decides to invite her sister, her boyfriend and a few friends to come over for a little while, and they can all just hang out and enjoy a little bit of a holiday. But little do they know that the area they're staying in is home to a feral family of cannibals. I read this as a buddy read with the lovely Emily at Page Turns. I will leave a link to her channel below. And we both really enjoyed it, and it was a fun experience reading it together. It did take me a little while to get into this. I actually thought the weakest part of the whole book was some of the initial setup and getting to know the characters. But once the action kicks in, this is where I thought his writing was excellent, and it became really gripping and compelling. It's definitely pretty gory and gruesome, so if that is not your cup of tea, then I wouldn't recommend it. But it's really excellently written, and even though some of the character development was a bit lacking, I was still really invested in the characters and what was happening to them, and I was really rooting for them. It's hard to say too much more about it because I don't want to spoil the ending. I really didn't know how it was going to pan out, so I will leave that up to you to find out for yourself. But I thought this was great, I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. And it was also really interesting in this edition because there's an afterword by the author where he goes into more detail about the editing process of when Offseason was initially published. So that was really cool to read about. And there is also a short story at the end called Winter Child, which I thought was really good too. So yeah, this one was great. Highly recommend if you're looking for something fast-paced and gory. And yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read The Loosening Skin by Aliya Whiteley. This is her newest novel. I think it came out earlier in November, and it's published by Unsung Stories, and they got in touch with me to see if I would like a copy to read and review, and I was all over that. Earlier this year I read Aliya Whiteley's The Beauty, which that particular edition also had another story called Peace Pipe, and they were both excellent. I really enjoyed them. The Beauty is kind of a horror, speculative fiction story, and Peace Pipe was more sci-fi. They were both really good. She's an excellent writer, so I jumped at the chance to read The Loosening Skin. This is speculative fiction, and it's about a world where people shed their skin every several years, and with it they shed all of the relationships that they had while they were in that skin. And we're following Rose. She was a bodyguard for a really famous actor called Max, and they also had a romantic relationship. But when Rose shed her skin, she walked away from the job and the relationship and didn't look back. But Max, with him being very famous and wealthy, he is on this new drug which allows him to not shed his skin. So he has all of his old skins that he keeps in a safe, but he isn't shedding anymore because of this drug. So he is still in love with Rose, but Rose is long gone. The story is told over multiple different time periods, and we're following Rose through different periods of her life. And one of those periods is sometime after their breakup, and Max actually tracks Rose down and tells her about a break-in that had happened in his home and the fact that his skins had been stolen, and he hires Rose to track them down. I thought this story and all of the characters were really interesting, and there is a lot of back and forth over different time periods, and honestly that did get a little confusing at times, but I actually quite enjoyed, you know, not being spoon-fed. It was quite a refreshing experience, and I overall really enjoyed it. It's a really unique story about love and relationships and the transitory nature of them. And yeah, if you're looking for something different, I definitely recommend it. I thought it was excellent and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This was another new release in November and I got a copy through NetGalley. And this is a satirical piece of literary fiction but with a bit of a horror edge. It's kind of like if American Psycho was based in Nigeria instead of New York, and that Patrick Bateman was a woman, and it's told from the sister's perspective. It's about two sisters and the story is told from the one who is more of an ugly duckling, and her younger beautiful sister has a bit of a problem with killing her boyfriends, and she always enlists her poor sister's help in clearing up afterwards. I loved her writing. It was very easy to get into and the story is very darkly humorous. It was a pretty short and fast read. I thought this one was brilliant and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Greetings from Moon Hill by Anthony J. Rapino. This is a short story collection all set in the fictional town of Moon Hill, where it is always autumn and it's always strange. Tony is a fellow YouTuber. He is a fellow fan of horror and Halloween and thrifting, and I've been subscribed to his channel for quite some time, and he got in touch with me recently to see if I'd be interested in reading and reviewing Greetings from Moon Hill, and I'm really glad I said yes because I really enjoyed it. Tony is a really talented writer and really versatile too. I was actually really surprised at the range of stories in this collection. They go all the way from more light-hearted and whimsical through to really dark, disturbing and gory, and everything in between. And that was really interesting because it kept the collection varied while the stories were still tied in this one town, and there were some recurring characters in different stories, and I thought it was really well done. A few of my favourite stories were Camera Obscura, which was a really intriguing and unsettling story about a man who has his photo taken with a pinhole camera. I also really liked Loosely Enforced Rules, which is about a group of 3 people who are out for a night of mayhem, and this one was pretty gory and gross in places and I really enjoyed it, and yeah, it's a bit splatterpunky and yeah, it was really good. And also The Plumber, which was a dark and disturbing and bizarre story that I really enjoyed. This collection also includes a novella called Reality Engineers, and this one was just a ton of fun. It was really entertaining, it was such a wild ride, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyable. So yeah, this was an excellent collection. Thank you again to Tony for sending a copy my way. I really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I decided to pick up a piece of non-fiction for Non-Fiction November, and I read Waiting to be Heard by Amanda Knox. And I listened to the audio version of this, which is narrated by Amanda Knox herself. This is a true crime memoir told about her experience when she was in Italy in 2007 studying, and she was arrested and imprisoned for the murder of her roommate. She and her boyfriend were implicated in this murder that they had absolutely nothing to do with. I had previously seen a documentary about this case, so I was already somewhat familiar with it, but it was still really interesting to hear about Amanda's personal experience, and obviously there was a lot more detail involved. I thought this was a really honest memoir, and she definitely doesn't paint herself in the most positive light all the time, and the fact that it was narrated by her as well really added another level of impact to the story. It really was heartbreaking at times hearing what she went through, and so frustrating to hear about how this whole story played out and how the local police seemed to kind of make up a story and then just make it fit. If you have an interest in shows like Making a Murderer, then I would recommend checking this out, whether you listen to her audiobook or if you check out a documentary or something. It's a really interesting case and yeah, really just frustrating and heartbreaking, but this one does have a happy ending, so that's good. And I gave this one 4 stars. Then I ended the month on an even higher note with a 5-star read, which was Sweetheart, Sweetheart by Bernard Taylor. This is a ghost story set in England, and it's about twin brothers and a beautiful cottage with a dark history. This was such an excellent read. It's a real hidden gem. His writing is beautiful and I loved every minute of it. I gave it 5 stars. And I made a separate review video about this book, so I will leave that linked below in the description if you want to check it out. But I highly, highly recommend it. So that was everything I read in November. Let me know if you've read any of these and tell me what you thought, or tell me about what you've been reading recently. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!